Hi, I'm Dr. Brian Kaufman, a retired family doctor, a CLL patient myself, Executive Vice President, Chief Medical Officer of the nonprofit CLL Society. Dr. Leyfman.
Thank you so much for having me. So, my name is Leyfman. I'm a U.S. trained MD, clinical researcher with a background in immunotherapy, immuno-oncology, gene therapy, and COVID-19. Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Leyfman, you've just recently graduated from medical school in the last year, but you've already done significant published peer-reviewed research, which is unusual. And there's a lot of areas that you've contributed to advancing the science. But I did want to focus in on a abstract that you presented at the American Society of Clinical Oncology's annual meeting in 2021, which talked about the relationship between cancer and COVID-19, certainly a hot topic this day. Can you tell us first, before you get into the details of the paper, why you decided to get involved in this kind of research, and then tell us about the abstract itself?
Right. Thank you so very much. So, for me, um, as you had eloquently stated, I am a Chernobyl survivor. And for most, this was their first pandemic. For me, this was my second. So, when COVID 19 struck the United States, I felt powerless, having to watch as many of my neighbors, family members, friends, and colleagues were in the front lines, with many of them falling ill, one by one, like dominoes. And in many ways, thinking back to Chernobyl, this seemed like deja vu all over again. And I really wanted to be a vehicle of change. Because back then, when I survived Chernobyl, I made a promise to myself that if I ever survive, I would do my best to never allow another pandemic occur like this under my watch, and just sitting there, um, in an idle state. And so I wanted to take the lessons that I learned and apply them. So, after the pandemic struck, I was recruited to join the global COVID 19 task force, initially to serve as a special advisor for immunology, oncology, and cellular therapeutics, after they had read my prior publications, specifically in the arena of CAR T cell therapy. In a very short time, I demonstrated my potential and was given a unique opportunity to become the director of their immunology division. If I could lead an international team of MDs, PhDs, and MD PhDs to further investigate the mechanisms involved in COVID 19. I'm happy to say that in a very short time, and despite the tall order, I rapidly galvanized our respective expertise, and within weeks, we proposed one of the first cohesive mechanisms for SARS-CoV-2 that still remains valid today, but also developed we were also amongst the first in the world to say what a promising therapy in that field is. And that the
Let me stop you there because I'm losing you a little bit here. You said a mechanism for SARS-CoV, a mechanism of for invasion. I'm not following what
right,
the mechanism.
right.
Yeah. So
So
explain this in a kind of the patient-friendly way, if you can.
got it.
Okay.
No worries. Thank you. So SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that causes COVID. So we basically broke down the mechanism of COVID-19, and that mechanism still proves to be true today. Where we basically showed that there is direct injury to the respective organs, like the brain, the heart, the lungs, but then there's also the other part, that is the cytokine release syndrome, that is the inflammatory aspect of the condition. And we explained it and we drew it out. We basically mapped out the mechanism. And one of the first things, as we know, in order for one to think of how can we treat something, we need to understand how it tends to work. And so,
So is this, I'm sorry to be interrupting here. So what you're talking about is your research led to the understanding that there was this biphasic aspect to COVID-19 infections. The first phase being the viral replication phase, where the viruses are taking off, and therapies should be antiviral and directed towards knocking back that replication. And the second is the horse is out of the barn, and now we have the body is reacting to it and maybe overreacting, which is the cytokine storm. And then it's the inflammation, and that's where the drugs that calm inflammation, like steroids, and interleukin 6, which is an inflammatory cytokine. There's drugs that specifically knock that back. Those are brought in. If you bring those in too soon, the virus replicates more quickly. If you bring them in too late, the inflammation causes damage. Am I getting where was it you did some of the basic science that led to that, which is now the treatment paradigm for COVID? Am I getting it, or is there a nuance here that I'm missing?
Largely, it is correct. It is. We did demonstrate that IL 6 was one of the main players, the main cytokines involved. And after we kind of mapped it out, we then asked the question, how can we stop it? Because largely, when the condition evolves and progresses from moderate to severe, there really are very limited therapies that are really effective against it. And so, in the course of our research, we stumbled upon a very promising therapy. So, that therapy is actually called mesenchymal stem cell therapy. So, I know what you're thinking. Like, what the heck is mesenchymal stem cell therapy? I'll be glad to explain it. So, uh, basically, it is these are stem cells that can be derived from placenta, from umbilical cord, from fat tissue, and from the bone marrow. This therapy is unique because it has antiviral potential, which means it can stop the virus from replicating. It has immunomodulatory potential, which means it can reset the immune response by blocking the pro inflammatory pathways, the pathways that rev up inflammation, while also turning on the anti inflammatory pathways to dampen on inflammation. So, in essence, I think of it as the reset switch for the immune response. But then it also has regenerative potential. And so, with that regenerative potential, the organs that were damaged, they become regenerated. Now, in Israel, they did a study and they had 7 patients with severe COVID 19, all of them with multi organ failure. Largely, essentially, they were put on close to palliative care. And they made a full recovery and they remained COVID free even at 28 days when they did the follow up. In a similar study from the University of Miami, patients under the age of 85 exhibit 100% survival by day 30, with promising results after 3 months follow up. This therapy received US FDA Fast Track designation on December 1st, 2020, a week before the vaccines.
So where is the therapy now in development? I know that with biologicals, the path to approval, it's hard enough to get drugs approved in the USA. But if it's a biological product, where quantifying it and stuff, the FDA can be very demanding in terms of what the standards are, where the product might vary from batch to batch. So I'm sure it's not a slam dunk to get this over the finish line and as a commercial product. Are there clinical trials open now if patients are interested in this? And where is this drug in development now? Living drug, I guess. Yeah.
Right. Very good questions. So, Mesoblast was the company that got US FDA Fast Track designation in December. They established a collaboration with Novartis for the expansion of this therapy. They've continued to demonstrate promising clinical data from their late phase clinical trials, uh, and the results were largely on par in terms of the data that had initially gotten them the fast track designation. And I hear rumblings in the background that they are hopefully going to meet with the FDA soon, and see and carve out a path for full fledged approval or something along those lines. So that's something to watch in the coming months.
This is extraordinarily exciting because I think the whole concept of uh, uh, cellular therapy is is so critical and so important in fighting cancer, but I think also has a role to play in fighting infections and viral infections too. That's not been exploited and has been largely observed by the success we've had in antimicrobials over the last several decades. But that clock is running out of time, and we have to be looking at new therapies, and that's what we're finding right now with COVID-19. Any I just one last question I'll throw in, because this was related to COVID-19 in cancer patients. Can you explain the cancer link in the abstract that you presented at ASCO?
Yes. So, as we know, cancer patients, due to their immunocompromised status, are an increased risk for severe COVID 19. And so, what we found was the connection between the two conditions is through hypoxia, which is low oxygen in the blood, where essentially um, progressive cancer causes hypoxia, and COVID in the in towards the latter stages of the disease also causes hypoxia, and that is essentially the link that stimulates greater IL-6 secretion, which then leads to the cytokine storm, cytokine cascade, and promotes inflammatory injury. And so we hope that with that in mind, potentially the mesenchymal stem cell therapy that I had spoken about a few moments ago could still apply, because so far the therapy is safe. There have really not been any significant side effects from it, if any. And we've seen such promising efficacy in patients who had severe COVID 19 that if one can potentially rectify the COVID problem in cancer patients, as we know over the past year, some patients' therapeutic therapies were interrupted because of COVID. That if you can take out the COVID problem, then it will allow these patients to get back to focusing on treating their cancer and hopefully getting better and resuming normalcy as a whole.
Dr. Leyfman, this is so exciting. It's a very interesting and a very different kind of approach that is taking, and just it reminds me like kind of the beginner's mind, just yet thinking outside of the box and looking at different things. But obviously, to get an abstract accepted at ASCO, it has to have real solid science behind it. And it sounds like you're working with a great team. Thank you so much for all you're doing.
Thank you so much. Truly a pleasure.